Resourceful Designer, episode 54. Should you find a graphic design niche?
Welcome to the Resourceful Designer podcast, offering solutions to streamline your graphic and web design business so you can get back to designing. And now, your host. His computer desktop image is the Toronto Maple Leafs. That's an ice hockey team, in case you didn't know. Mark Decote.
Welcome to another episode. I'm always glad when you join me to discuss graphic design and running our business. Now, I don't know about you, but I'm at the point in the year where I'm not really taking on any more new work right now. But when people call up with new projects for me, it is so rewarding to say that I'm completely booked up for the rest of the year and I'll only be able to tackle your project come January. That happened to me a few times this week. I actually had 2 recurring clients call me up and they both want websites, not for their regular business. Both of them are starting a secondary business and want websites. And I had somebody else call, which was a referral from another website client that referred them to me. So right now I've got 2 contracts signed and one of them is still in negotiation. But if everything goes according to plans, I'm going to have a great beginning to 2017. Now I want to remind you that the show notes for this episode can be found at resourcefuldesigner.com/episode 54. And if I do mention any links throughout the episode, that's where you'll be able to find them. Now speaking of links, it's time for me to share with you this week's Resource of the Week. And this week, I want to talk about Creative Live. Now, Creative Live is a great resource for courses and classes you can take to help you in your graphic design business. They have some really good classes, from learning various software to design principles to some of the really nitty-gritty things when it comes to either running a business or design, as well as a bunch of other things if you're into photography, scrapbooking, other sorts of arts, or all sorts of stuff. To be honest, I haven't explored all their different courses. I usually just look at what they have for design. But the reason I wanted to share Creative Live with you today is because they offer free live and on-air classes on a regular basis. Now, what this means is that on certain times, they will just broadcast one of their classes. Normally, this is a class you would pay for, but they would just broadcast it for you to see free of charge. Now, of course, you have to be there during the time that it airs, and that's for their live classes. And then their on-air classes, sometimes what they'll do is they'll put them up for 1 or 2 days, and you'll be able to watch them at your leisure. But once that time period is up, then that class is no longer free. So if you're interested in checking out what sort of free classes that they have to offer for you, visit resourcefuldesigner.com/creativelive and have a look at what's coming up. I took a quick peek at what sort of classes that they have upcoming in the month of December, and there's a few of them that I'm interested in taking. There's one on December 4th and 5th that's entitled How to Design a Proposal. There's a class put on by Debbie Millman, very popular in the graphic design industry, called A Brand Called You. There's courses on hand lettering. In case you're still fairly new and just starting off, there's a class on design fundamentals. There's another one on building infographics in Illustrator, not to mention a whole bunch of other classes that have to do with the various Adobe Creative Cloud programs like Photoshop and Illustrator and InDesign. And as I said, all of these things are the ones I was looking on where they were offering free courses. Now, you do have to register for these courses in order to take them, but they don't cost you a cent. So if you want to take some time to either refresh your skills or learn a new skill, or just see if you're on par with what everybody else is doing, visit resourcefuldesigner.com/creativelive and register to take one of these free courses. Who knows, maybe you'll like it enough that you'll pay for one of the larger courses. And now, on to today's topic. Now, have you ever considered a niche for your design business? Now, I'm going to come right out and say this right at the beginning. I know that some people say niche, some people say niche, and who knows, I might in this presentation go back and forth. Most of the time I call it a niche, but if I happen to change my pronunciation during this podcast, you'll just have to bear with me. Now, I got this idea for this topic after meeting Molly in the Resourceful Designer Facebook group, which if you're not part of, what are you waiting for? Visit resourcefuldesigner.com/group and ask to join. Now, Molly works exclusively in the dog industry. She is a graphic designer and she designs stuff for dog people, mostly for people involved with conformation. And if you're not sure what that is, conformation in the dog world would kind of be the beauty pageant, if you will, of the dog world. I know dog people are going to say, oh, it's so much more than that. And it is. But very general purposes, that's what it is. It's the beauty pageant of the dog world. And there are a lot of passionate people out there in that industry. And it is an industry, trust me. Now, my wife and I, we've never competed in conformation with our dogs, but we often went to agility trials. We did agility and we did obedience trials with our dogs. And a lot of times those trials are done in conjunction with conformation. So we would see that side of it as well, even though we've never competed on that side. But when I say it's an industry, trust me, there is big bucks to be made in this industry. These people are not just showing their dogs for the fun of it. They're showing these dogs try to win titles, because the more titles their dogs can win, the more in demand and the higher prices they can charge when it comes to breeding purposes. So Molly works in this industry where she creates ads for people showcasing their dogs. Now, I don't know exactly everything that Molly does, and I'm just guessing at a little bits and pieces of this, but it's still her niche. She is the designer for the dog industry, and she's doing pretty well at it. So what exactly is a niche? Now, according to the dictionary, it's a distinct segment of a market, a place, employment, status, or activity for which a person or thing is best fitted. Now, think about that definition. A place where a person is best fitted. So, in Molly's case, she feels she is best fitted as a designer to serve the dog industry. And that is just one small niche out of thousands and possibly millions of niches out there ripe for the taking. Now, I don't want you to get niche confused with somebody working in an in-house design studio. Now, some people might say, well, that's kind of a niche because all your designs are working towards one company. But it's not quite the same thing. My good buddy Dan, he worked at a company for years that made scientific lab equipment. And Dan got to work on a wide variety of projects, but they were all focused on a similar theme. And that was the theme that the company dictated. I mean, every project he worked on pretty well had to do with the equipment the company manufactured. And all the designs he did followed the same design guideline set forth by the company or by those that came before him, because he wasn't the one that created those guidelines. So sometimes working for an in-house design company could be confused with working in a niche, because he's working for one specific company and that's where everything he's doing is. But I don't consider that. Some people would, I don't personally. For it to be considered a niche, I would have said Dan would have had to work for many different companies that all made scientific lab equipment. Then he would be considered working in a niche. Working for a single company, in my opinion at least, is not a niche. Because to me, a niche is when you do work in a similar area, but with different clients and on a wide array of different projects. You have much more variety when you're working in a niche than when you're working in an in-house design studio. But really, niches and in-house design studios are two different things. Now, before I get off the whole in-house design studio, I just want to say that if you do work at an in-house design studio, meaning you work at a design department for some larger company, that is a great way to gain experience and gain focus on your creativity, because you are reined in. You are colored into following certain guidelines, certain criteria, and still trying to come up with creative ways to do things. And it is a great way to learn your skills. But if you stay in it for too long, this is my opinion, but if you stay in an in-house design studio for too long, you can start to stagnate. In fact, my friend Dan, he left it after several years of working there. He left that company because he wanted to broaden his design skills. He figured that he had been doing the same things over and over. They were all different projects, and I saw some of them very creative, very well done. But again, all following within the restricted guidelines that were set for him. So if you do work in an in-house design studio and you're listening to this podcast because you're thinking one day you'd like to start your own design business, I think that is a really good choice, because the designers that I know that have worked at an in-house design studio, if they didn't leave after so many years, their design skills started to degrade. Anyways, enough about that. So, what sort of niches are there in the design industry? Well, I can go on for hours and hours if I wanted to name them all, but let's just talk about some popular ones here. There are some designers out there that all they do is logo design. They don't do anything else. They just design the logos. And some designers love that. They consider themselves logo designers, and they design all these logos and then pass them off to somebody else to do whatever they will do with them. Whether it's put it on stationery, branding across the whole company, that designer just concentrates on the logo. There are other designers that concentrate just on direct mail. That's all they do is direct mail pieces. They work with all sorts of different companies, but they focus only on direct mail. I mean, you can get really broad and say that somebody who just does web design or somebody who just does print design are working in a niche in a way, I guess. If you only do web design and you don't do print design, then that's the part of the design industry that you are covering. Now, that's a little bit more broad than what the point I'm trying to get across in this episode, but it is really a niche. There's package design, which is another niche. Maybe you do clothing, like the fabric design, like the different patterns to go on fabrics. Maybe you do t-shirt design. There was another graphic design podcast that was short-lived that I listened to for a bit. I don't think he's publishing anymore. But the host, that's what he did for a living, was he designed t-shirts for rock bands. And that's all he did. So there are lots of different design niches you can be in. I know a fellow designer who specializes in weddings, designs all sorts of stuff for weddings, from wedding invitations to books to all the different mail outs and everything. But that's what she specializes in, is weddings. And that's great. And these are all design niches. Now, the other side of it is you can also have client niches. In other words, you only do work for certain clients. You've heard me mention before on the podcast how I knew somebody who designed websites exclusively for dentists. That's all they did, was they designed websites for dentists. Maybe you want to design restaurant menus, and that's all you do. You become a designer who designs restaurant menus. Maybe, like the other podcaster I told you about who did t-shirt designs for bands, maybe you do design works only for bands or artists, musicians. Maybe you work exclusively for medical clinics or for race teams, people that are racing motorcycles, racing cars, racing boats. Maybe you do the design for race teams. There are so many different client niches out there that you can be part of and that you can make a name for yourself in. So now that I told you a little bit about what sort of niches there are, and again, there are thousands of them. I'm not going to go over everything in this podcast, but what are the benefits of working in a niche? I mean, you're a graphic designer. You can actually do anything you want. So why would you want to focus on one small corner of the market? Well, first off, when you do niche down into a certain corner of the market, you automatically become an expert in that, or at least you are viewed as an expert. Think about the designer I mentioned that did websites exclusively for dentists. If you're a dentist and you think, well, I'm just opening up a new practice, I need a website for my business, and you start looking for web designers, maybe you find a graphic design generalist or a web design generalist, somebody who designs websites like I do for any industry. And you talk to them and it's like, great, okay, I got some good information. They sound like really good. But then you find out that there's a graphic designer that only does websites for dentists. And you talk to this person, and this person seems to know your industry. They know everything about it. Well, who are you going to lean towards? Who do you think you're going to hire? Even if the dentist designer is more expensive, you automatically view this person as an expert, and you will be more inclined to hire them. Think about it from our point of view as designers. Let's say you designed something for yourself. You were going to sell it somewhere and somebody stole your design. They took your intellectual property, your copyrighted image, and they're using it for themselves. Now, you can go to a general lawyer and try to get help in order for them to go after them. But if you know a copyright lawyer, somebody who specializes in this sort of thing, wouldn't you want to hire that person, even if it costs a little bit more? Because you know that person knows what they're talking about in this particular area, as opposed to a general lawyer that works on all sorts of things business and might touch every once in a while on copyright, or maybe never touched on copyright in their career. Which one are you going to trust more? you're going to trust more the one that is in the niche. And that's because anybody who is servicing a certain niche should be and is considered to be more knowledgeable about that niche. Could I design an ad for some dog breeder to go into a magazine promoting their dog as the perfect mate for someone else? Yes, sure, I can do it. But you know what? I'm pretty sure Molly could probably design a better ad because she understands that niche more than I do. Think about the dentist thing again. If the dentist goes to a regular generalist graphic designer and they says, we need a website or I need a website, and that designer will say, okay, well, what do you want? What sort of pages do you want? You want a home page? You want an about page? Do you want maybe a page to book appointments? What else can we put on there? A page listing your services and all that? And the dentist might say, yeah, that sounds great. That sounds great. But then the dentist goes to the designer who specializes in designing websites for dentists. And this designer will start asking them, okay, well, what sort of things do you want on your website? You're going to want a home page. You're going to want an about page. You're going to want an appointment page. But do you want a page talking about oral hygiene and best practices? Do you want a page talking about gingivitis and how to combat it? Do you want a page talking about how to take care of your retainer? And they know all this stuff because they've dealt with other dentists. So when a new dentist comes on and they're hired, they know all the stuff that dentists like. And sometimes they can suggest something that the dentist hiring them might not have thought of. And that's why the person in the niche is more knowledgeable about that industry. Now, what that then turns into is somebody that gets better referrals from people inside that industry. Think about a bunch of dentists going to some conference somewhere and they're talking and somebody says, oh, you have a website? And says, yeah, well, who did you get to design it? And they tell the person that they hired some designer who specializes in doing dentist websites. Well, now the other designers around there, their ears are perking up because maybe some of them are thinking, well, I need a website as well. And I was going to hire so-and-so to design my website. But wait a minute, there's a graphic designer out there that specializes in websites for dentists. I better talk to this person. So the referrals that your clients give to other people will be much stronger than just saying, yeah, I have a good graphic designer who built my website. I have a great graphic designer who understands our industry who built my website will go much, much further. Now, the other benefit of working in a niche like this is because of your knowledge, because of your expertise, it makes the decisions by your clients that much easier because they trust that you already know their business and you don't have to do as much research into the business as well. Because chances are you've already done some of that research or as you've gained your knowledge working in this niche, you've learned all this stuff so that you don't have to do research every time you get a new client. You might have to do a little bit maybe about their location and a little bit about them, but generally you know about the industry. And because of that, whenever you start talking to your client and you start suggesting things, it's a lot easier for your client to agree and to come to a decision on things because they trust you more, viewing you again as the expert. And another benefit, huge benefit to working in a niche, you can charge a lot more than other designers and still get the work. Again, if you're the expert, if somebody goes to a general graphic designer and says, I need a website, and that designer says, sure, I can do the website for, I'll just throw a figure out, $3,000. And then they contact you, who is an expert in designing websites specifically for their industry, and you show it in your presentation, and then you come back and say, yeah, I can design a website for you. It'll cost you $5,000. You know, for the difference, the client might say it's worth spending the extra money because now I'm dealing with an expert in the industry. It's the same thing when it came to the lawyers earlier. You want to go after that person who stole your intellectual property. You know you're darn well better off paying more money for the copyright lawyer to help you out than you are to pay smaller fees for a general lawyer to help you. You'll get much more bang for your buck. So you see what the benefits are of niching down? Now, you may be thinking, yeah, that's great, Mark, but you've never mentioned that you have a niche, and I don't want to limit myself. I like doing design work. I like working with all sorts of different clients, and I don't want to be focused or be tied down to just one part of the industry. And that's why I don't want to niche down. Well, let me tell you a secret. Are you ready? You can have more than one niche. Wow, mind-blowing, isn't it? You can actually have more than one niche. Or you can be a generalist and also service a special niche. I consider myself a generalist when it comes to graphic design. I'll work on anything. But I'm carving myself a niche in the podcasting industry. I'm getting more and more podcasters coming to me for their artwork because I've become known in podcasting as the go-to person. Now, of course, it's a huge, huge industry and there's lots of other designers working in podcasting, but it's nice that I'm carving my own little niche in there. I'm getting referred by other people as if you need podcast artwork, if you need a website for podcasting, Mark's the guy to go to. So even though I am a generalist, I do have that little niche that I am working on. But there's nothing stopping you from working on more than one niche at a time. Think of Molly that I talked about at the beginning. With all her knowledge and expertise of dog shows and how the dog industry works and what's best for people that want to showcase their animal to other dog breeders, what's stopping Molly from using all that knowledge and going over and working on cat shows? Molly's probably crying out blasphemy. Dog person working in the cat industry. Oh, she's probably unsubscribing from the podcast right now. But the fact of the matter is, the two industries are not that different. Somebody going out to win awards and win ribbons and showing off their dog is not that different from the cat industry that's doing the same thing. So there's nothing stopping Molly from using all her expertise that she's built up over the years working in the dog industry to break in and niche in the cat industry as well. I'm not saying she's going to go out and do it, but you see what I mean, where you can do that. And it doesn't have to be related like that. I mentioned how I'm cutting a niche into the podcasting industry. Well, if I wanted to, I could flip things around and create a niche in the camping industry. I love camping. I know all sorts of stuff about camping. I could go after campgrounds and camp equipment places and create a niche there if I wanted to. The niches don't have to be related. They can, and if you have the knowledge like Molly does of dogs and you want to transform it over to cats they have shows for reptiles, they have shows for horses, they have all sorts of different shows that are similar, that expertise could be ported over to these different ones and creating different niches. Now, you may be thinking, well, if you start doing that and you branch off too much, then aren't you becoming a generalist again instead of somebody that's niching down? But here's the kicker. These different businesses don't have to overlap. Molly has established herself in the dog industry. I'm pretty sure she has a website dedicated to everything she does for dogs. But there's nothing stopping her from creating a completely different website that would be servicing cats or horses or reptiles or cows or pigs or whoever wants to show stuff. In fact, she could create separate websites for every one of those. And in each one of them, she would be considered the expert in that niche. I know a photographer who specializes in sports photography. And for years, he was trying to make a name for himself as a sports photographer. And he was gaining some traction, gaining some ground, getting some work in sports photography. And then he decided to branch off into different niches. And even though he does have a main website for his sports photography, he created another website specifically for hockey photography, ice hockey. He created another one for football. He created another one for baseball. He created another one for soccer. And to be honest, I don't know how many websites he has, but he created specific websites for each different sport. And all of a sudden, his business shot up. Because now when somebody was out looking, say some local football league wanted to get some photos taken of their teams, and they don't know who to go to, and they start looking up football photographer, they might come up with a bunch of sports photographer, but when they find a website that's dedicated specifically to a photographer that specializes in football, there's no reason to look any further. The person found the photographer they're looking for. And the same could be done for graphic design. Think about it. A plumber looking for a website or a plumber looking for a brochure and finds a graphic designer that specializes in plumbers, or a singer trying to break into the music industry who finds himself a designer that specializes in musicians, or a playwright trying to promote their newest creation who finds a designer who specializes in the theater industry. I'm pretty sure you're getting the idea. It's simply find the niche and make yourself the expert. And really, there's nothing hard involved in making yourself the expert other than saying that this is what you do. Just being there, people will automatically view you as the expert. Now, I mentioned design and clients, but I just want to also touch on location. Sometimes location could be a great niche as well. If you're a web designer, and let's say you live in Charleston, South Carolina, well, make sure you put that into everything you do. Niche down and say that you are a web designer focusing on Charleston, South Carolina. Now, the reason you do that is it's not so much a niche. That's more for findability. If somebody in Charleston, South Carolina is looking for a graphic designer and they find a few people, but they find one that specializes in websites for the area, again, they might be more inclined to choose that person because they're local. So if you live in a larger area, if you live in a small rural community, it might not help. But if you live near a bigger area and you try to focus all your energy on that area as opposed to being a generalist, I'm just a graphic designer out there. If you focus and say, I'm a graphic designer for this area, then you can gain a lot of traction for that location. Way back in episode 14, I had Wes McDowell on as a guest. And that episode was about moving your graphic design business. Now, Wes is the host of the Deeply Graphic Design podcast. And he had moved his business from Los Angeles, California to Chicago. And in that episode, I talked about what's involved when you move your business. And what Wes was doing was he had created a niche as a web designer for the Los Angeles area. Well, now he was trying to create that same expertise in Chicago. And he was building up. He created a completely separate landing page on his website specifically for Chicago. And he was concentrating on that to become an expert for the Chicago area. And his effort is paying off. So don't count out location as a viable niche. Now, one thing I want to say, and again, people are going to say, well, Mark, if it's such a great idea, why aren't you doing it? And I mentioned I am carving a small niche out of the podcasting industry, but that's not something I went out looking for. It's just something that happened over time with me doing more and more stuff for podcasters. They know I'm a podcaster. I'm in the podcasting space. I belong to podcaster Facebook groups. And over time, word has gotten out that Mark is the person to go to. But the thing is if you are going to niche, you have to make sure it's something you're passionate about. Like if I start picking on Molly again, sorry, Molly, by the way, but if I pick on Molly again, and I mentioned how she could easily transpose all that she knows about the dog industry into the cat industry, but maybe Molly's not passionate about cats and really doesn't want to work with cats. If you're not passionate about it, then really you shouldn't be working in that niche. And that's one of the reasons why I'm a generalist, because there was never a certain part of the industry or a certain niche that I felt passionate enough about in order to devote all my time towards. It's not for me, and it's not for everyone. But there are some people out there that are making a killing. And I mean a killing. They are charging huge bucks because they are the expert in their niche. And as I said in the benefits earlier, whenever you are that expert, you can charge a lot more money than what others are charging, and you will get your price because you are considered that expert. So if you're somebody that's just starting out, or you're thinking of starting your business, or maybe you have an established business, think about it. Is there something you're passionate about? Do you have a hobby that you love? Maybe you love going out sailboating on the weekends, or you like mountain climbing. Maybe you collect stamps. I don't know. Whatever your hobby is, if it's something you're passionate about, you could make a niche out of that and say, from this point forth, I'm the graphic designer for that niche. Either create yourself a brand new website for it in order to promote it, or make a portion of your website if you want. It works better if you have a brand new or a completely different website. And as I said, there's nothing wrong with focusing on a certain niche as well as on everything else. As long as you're viewed as the expert, it doesn't matter if you're working on other things. As long as you're viewed in the expert in that area, people will come to you. As the old saying goes, the riches are in the niches. So think about it. Have you ever considered niching down? I would love to hear from you. Visit resourcefuldesigner.com/episode 54 and leave me a comment on the show notes page, letting me know if you have a certain niche that you work on, or if it's something you've ever considered. I would love to hear from you. Now it's time for this week's question of the week. And this is a short question. This one comes in from Don, and he simply asks, do you work with dual monitors, and at what point does multiple screens become nonsense? Well, Don, no, I don't work with multiple monitors. I have a 27-inch iMac that I have. And although I would love to have multiple monitors, not multiple, maybe 2 monitors, I would love to have a second monitor. I could never justify the expense because really, in my opinion, or for what I do, it would just be a luxury. Now, a good friend of mine recently sold his iMac and he switched over to a MacBook Pro. And he bought himself I forget what he called it, but it's like an extra wide. It's wider than a cinema monitor. It's like I forget what he called it, but it's something, it's like 39 inches wide by the regular height. So he now divides it into 4 quarters and he can put everything across it. He sent me some photos and it looks amazing. And I would love to do something like that. But again, I can't justify the expense involved in something like that when really I don't need it. You got to look. If you have the money, go for it. It is great. It's nice to be able to move stuff off to the side on a second monitor and say, like, this is where I'm going to keep all my palettes, or maybe I'll keep my email or some other stuff open on the side while I'm working on the main monitor. But really, all it comes down to is the tools. Having another monitor is just another tool. And having another tool does not make you a better designer. The same thing goes for the software you use. People often ask me whenever they find out I'm not on Creative Cloud. I still have Adobe Photoshop and Illustrator. Actually, what I have is Creative Suite version 5, CS5, and I'm still working on that. I never switched over to the Creative Cloud because I didn't want to have to pay a monthly fee on it. And people are saying, well, how can you work in that? Well, the thing is they're just tools. The design comes from me. The skill comes from me. And I haven't found anything in the newer versions of the program that really merited me spending the extra money where I can still use my skills to their fullest in the software that I currently have. And the same goes for monitors or special peripherals or equipment. They're all just tools. You should be able to do your job regardless. Yes, tools do make your job easier, but they shouldn't be doing your job for you. I love the comparison whenever I hear it to carpentry and how 100 years ago, people were building beautiful, beautiful cabinets and furniture and all sorts of stuff using simple hand tools. And yes, maybe these days with the modern electronic and power tools and everything, it makes the job easier, but it doesn't necessarily make the job better. So I don't know if that answers your question, Don. I don't use multiple monitors. If I had the money and I would like a second monitor. More than that, in as far as what we do, maybe there's some industries where having 3, 4, 5, 6 monitors is worth it. But as graphic designers, I don't see the need for it myself. But even having a second monitor to me is a luxury. And it would not make me a better graphic designer. But again, that's just my opinion. I know there's many designers out there that do have multiple monitors. And that's great. In a way, I am envious. But I have other things I could spend the money on than buying a second monitor for myself. So, simple question from Don, simple answer, I hope. And that brings this episode of the podcast to an end. Now, I haven't quite decided what my episode next week will be about, so I'm not going to mention anything here other than reminding you about this week's resource of the week, which is Creative Live. And again, they offer some great courses. And when you do pay for their courses, you have the course for life. And when I talk about courses, I'm not talking about a 1 hour or 2 hour. I'm talking courses or classes that are 8, 12, 16, 18, 20 hours long, depending on the course. So these are real classes that you're getting. And as I mentioned at the beginning, if you visit resourcefuldesigner.com/creative-live and you click on their live and on air, they do offer almost on a daily basis one of their courses, and they have, I think, over 1,500 classes available. They offer on a daily basis one class that you can watch for free. So go check it out. As I mentioned earlier, there's some great ones for our industry coming up in December. And beyond that, I didn't look at any sort of schedule beyond December because that's just in the next few weeks at the time of this recording. But go check it out, resourcefuldesigner.com/creative-live. And who knows, improve your skills, learn something new, refresh yourself on something. You'll be the better designer for it. So that's it for me this week. Things are getting really exciting as we head into December and as the holiday approaches. And I hope that your business stays strong for the rest of the year. Until next time, I wish you all the best in your graphic design business. I am Mark Decote, reminding you to stay creative.
Thanks for listening to the Resourceful Designer podcast at resourcefuldesigner.com.